So now let's move on to Matplotlib. And it's a library for creating plots, graphs, bar graphs, line charts, and so on. But before we do that, we have to create a plot area. And we do that using the figure object. So let's import Matplotlib and run this cell. And let's create our figure object. So I'm gonna set fig to plc.figure. And let's run that. And you see we created a figure object, but it doesn't have any axes. So now let's add an axis. So first let me add the axis and then I'll explain what it's doing. .add _ axis. And it takes our rect argument. And that takes 4 elements. Or we need to put it as a list. So let's run it. And you see we created our figure. So what axis does is that it takes the rect argument. And the third and fourth element is the width and the height. And by default, the width is 6.4 and the height is 4.8. These first two arguments deals with the left and the bottom. We'll only need to change this if we want to add more than one axis. So if we want to cut this into half, we can put 0.5 here. And we'll also cut the width in half from the default. And let's run that. And you see we get smaller. We can establish our own height and width. And we do that with the Figsize argument. So again, I'll just copy this, paste it here. And in the figure arguments, we just have to write Figsize. And I want to set it to 5 by 5. And then it will return a height of 2.5 and a width of 2.5 because 0.5 times 5 is 2.5. And let's run that. Or we should surround this by brackets. Now let's run that. And you see we got our 2.5 by 2.5. We can assign axis to a variable. So let me just copy this, paste it here. And let's create a variable called axes and set that equals to, and I'm just gonna copy this, Control C, paste it, and let's run that. Oh, we need to put fig. Calling our fig variable that we created here to add the axis onto it. And let's run that. And you see we got the same figure that we got up here. So now let's add 2 axes. So I'm gonna copy this, paste it here, and call this one axis 2. And let's run that. And we have 2 axes, but we can't see it because it's overlapping each other. So if we want to bring axis 2 to the right, we need to put a 1 in our right argument. So let's run that. And you see we got 2 axes in our figure object. Let me change this to 1. Let me make the axis bigger. And let's run that. And you see it's too close to each other because of how big it is. If we want to create some space from the right, we just give this a 1.5. Now let's run that. And you see we created some space. Now let's add labels and titles. So I'm just going to go here. And we'll add titles to both axes. So I'm going to call in our first axis, I'm going to use the set title. And I'm going to call it chart 1 or chart uno. Then let me just copy this, paste it. We want axis, set the title to axis 2. I'm gonna call it chart dos. And now let's run that. And you see we added titles to our axes. So let me put title here. And now I want to give labels to our X and Y. So labels. So I'm going to call in the first axis dot set X label. Should be an underscore between set X label. And I'm going to put our X for chart uno. And then I'm just going to copy this. Control V. Change this Y. And then I'm going to change this to our Y for chart uno. Then I'm gonna copy both of these because I just don't want to type over and over again. And then I'm gonna set axis to 2. And then I'm gonna write X label for chart dos. Then I'm gonna say Y label for chart dos. Now let's run that. And you see we created our X and Y labels and also put titles in our chart. If we want to remove this, we can write this plt.show. Whoa. And let's run that. And you see it was removed. But there's an easier way to create multiple charts. So let's move on to subplots. And subplots is more convenient than using the figure method. So let me create subplots. And then I'm going to give it 1 row and 1 column. So what this means, that is going to give us 1 plot, 1 row and 1 column. Let's say if we want 1 row and 2 columns, so it's going to give 2 charts side by side. We put 2 in the column argument. And you see it gives us our subplots. We can do 2 by 2. We can also do 3 by 3 if we want, so on. But you see it's all jumbled up too close to each other. So we can fix this with the type layout argument. Type layout, and we set that equals to true. And let's run that. And you see we got some space. So now let's make labels and titles for subplots. I'm just gonna do 2 because it'll be a while to create labels for all of these. So 2 by 2. And then we want 2 axes. So the way how we do this, figure, and then we're gonna add our axes in between brackets. So x1, x2, and I'm gonna set that equals to plt subplots. Let's run that. And you see we got our 2 by 2. Let me give 1 row and 2 columns instead. And you see we have 1 row and 2 columns. So let's add labels and titles for the first axis. So I'm gonna call in up the first axis. So axis 1 dot set underscore title, and I'm gonna say our first, and then I'm gonna set the Y label. Then I'm gonna call that height. Gonna set the X label. Call that age. So let me run that. And you see we labeled we didn't get the X label because I made a mistake here. I'm supposed to put X label here. Let's run that. And you see we got the age. So now let's set the labels and titles for the second axis. So let me copy this. Paste it here. For the second axis. Then I'm gonna change this to x2. Call this our second. I'm just gonna call these cars, mile. And let's run that. And you see we did the labeling and titling for our second axis. We can also change the size of this by adding the Figsize method. So Figsize equals, I'm gonna give it 12 by 8. Let's run that. And you see we gave our figure a bigger size. Let me give it 8x4 to see what it looks like. And that's a little better. If we want to change the font size, we could do this with the font dict argument. Set that equals to a dictionary font size. And we want to give it size of 20. I'm just going to copy this. Paste this here. And I'm going to do the same for her. And just set these to 15. And now let's run that. And you see our changes has been made. In the next lesson, we'll go over how to create a bar plot.